It is Wednesday, November 11th, 2020. I'm Pastor Thor Ramsey with Center Church. This is Gospel for Five, where we take 5 minutes out of our day, focus on the gospel and the one who saved our souls, because Jesus is the gospel. So here we are. This is a charge that comes up often in the Apostle Paul's ministry. This is actually a charge that you sometimes may hear in sharing the gospel. When you tell people, you know what, you're not saved by your morality, you're not saved by your own righteousness, you're not saved by your behavior. And most people are kind of offended by that, because I'm a basically good person. It's like, well, you're not saved by your morality. And they're like, well, what on earth am I saved by? It's kind of their thinking. And then when you tell them a worse type of sinner, the citizen that they consider beneath themselves, that person is actually a Christian, I was like, wait a second. You're telling me that person will get into heaven before me? So you're telling me we're saved by grace plus nothing so that I can live however I want then? So Christ really is leading me into sin so I can sin all the more since I'm already saved? What's Paul say? Certainly not. Again, verse 17, but if in our endeavor to be justified in Christ, we too were found to be sinners, is Christ then a servant of sin? Certainly not. He's not leading people into sin. For if I rebuild what I tore down, I prove myself to be a transgressor. Now that's, again, this section of Galatians is a little more difficult, but the idea is this. Remember the context. The Apostle Peter, who was agreeing that the gospel is grace plus nothing, and then these false brothers came in and says, no, the gospel is grace plus something. And then Peter started acting like the gospel again was grace plus something, and the something in this case was circumcision. Then he's tore down what he was proclaiming. So he's shown himself to be a sinner. Because what? Well, sometimes as sinners we can be hypocritical, and that's what Peter was doing. For if I rebuild what I tore down, I prove myself to be a transgressor. For through the law I died to the law, so that I might live to God. What's Paul mean there? For through the law I died to the law, so that I might live to God. Well, let me just read you the New Living Translation, which really acts a little bit more like a commentary, though it's good if the Bible's new to you, because it's not as hard to understand. And it's still an accurate translation. It's just more of a paraphrase. Where are we at here? We're in verse 19. For when I tried to keep the law, it condemned me. Now there you have it. Paul's saying, I tried to keep the law, and I was really good at it, and yet still I failed, and it condemned me. So the law showed me I was a sinner. So instead of trying to follow the law in order to be saved, I stopped doing that. In other words, I died to the law so that I could live to God, so that I could actually have a relationship with God. I stopped depending upon the law and what? Had faith in Christ, because the gospel is grace plus nothing. So, for through the law I died to the law so that I might live to God, have an actual, legitimate relationship with God. And in verse 20 it says, I have been crucified with Christ. I have been crucified with Christ. Now he's saying this in a way, it means it's past tense. This is something that's been done. This is the same thing we went over a couple Sundays ago in Romans chapter 6. That this is in the past tense. It's a done deal. When you're united to Christ, what's true of him now becomes true of you. Since he was crucified, you were crucified with him. Your old self was crucified with him. You're not any longer under the rule and reign of sin and death. You're now under the reign and the dominion of God's beloved Son. So, I've been crucified with Christ. That's a done deal. Your old self is dead. So stop letting your old self speak into your life. Stop letting the enemy use all your old habits and old thinking patterns to accuse you and stumble you up so you feel like you're still under the domain of sin and darkness, that you're still under their rule. But he says, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And we'll unpack what that actually means tomorrow. So what's God said to you today?